The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center reports a 4.4 magnitude earthquake occurred at 2:24 p.m., centered in the vicinity of the south side of Kilauea volcano. This earthquake was not large enough to cause a tsunami for the island of Hawaii, repeating there is no tsunami threat to the island of Hawaii. We are on watch 24 hours a day for your safety. This is your Hawaii County Civil Defense Agency.
Four days ago, the FEMA Disaster Recovery Center, or DRC, opened, and in that time, hundreds of people have passed through and then come here to Pu'uhonua Okuna to share what they've learned. Now, the only thing they all have in common is that they need help, but exactly what that means or will look like is as different as you can imagine.
Everybody's got a different story, and I think a lot of people are just unsure because the fissure keeps going.
Thomas Mason and his wife moved from Maui in November and started building their retirement home on Kupono Street in February of this year. They were just about ready for drywall when the first fissure opened up on Mohala Street. 23 fissures later, they're now in an area that's been classified as uninhabitable. Although their house is unfinished, it is still standing, but is completely inaccessible.
So are they going to condemn that area? I mean, if it's right next to Fissure 8, are they going to eminent domain? Are they going to say, well, you weren't finished, so you really don't have anything anyway? See you later?
Mason spent 3 hours at the FEMA DRC on Friday, but was told his situation was so unique, he should prepare for rejection and be ready to appeal. Like so many others, the Masons don't have insurance.
You don't get house insurance to have a house. So we got 3/4 of a house.
If FEMA doesn't come through with assistance, Mason says he has no idea what he and his wife will do. The only certainty is that after 34 years together, they won't be moving into the home they started building on Valentine's Day.
So I think it's just kind of the wait and see, what's going to happen.
The Masons have such a positive attitude, and in the meantime, he says he will continue to do his homework and try to remain patient while he pesters FEMA as much as possible. Keep in mind, the DRC is open daily from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. at the Kea'au High School. Reporting live here in Pahoa, Mileka Likin, Hawaii News Now.
Fortunately, we've gotten much better at predicting eruptions for the simple reason we've gotten much better at instrumenting volcanoes, not just with seismometers, but other instruments like continuous GPS receivers, tilt meters that can tell a change in slope on the volcano with an amount that's maybe 1/1000th of a degree. And we also have a whole new generation of satellites up in the sky that can tell us when the ground at a particular volcano is swelling. And it's literally inflating because the magma chamber system beneath the volcano is being pressurized with gas and a supply of new magma. What's really transformed volcano monitoring in the past 20 years, and certainly within the past 10, is the fact that we can have multiple real-time data streams coming in on a volcano from ground-based instruments as well as satellite-based instruments, such that we can see eruption precursors. Those eruption precursors consist of changes in gas emission, changes in groundwater chemistry if we've been sampling the groundwaters at the volcano on a regular basis, increases in the number of small magnitude earthquakes beneath the summit or nearby, changes in slope on the volcano that we can detect with both continuous GPS instruments and tilt meters, and looking at satellite imagery for hot pixels. In other words, gases are often some of the first things released as the magma is transiting in the crust, and the gases, because they've been in contact with the magma, are pretty much at the same temperature, and they will find cracks and zones of weakness to the surface because they're the most buoyant and mobile component that the magma is bringing towards the surface of the Earth. So if we look at satellites that give us infrared images, and we look at infrared data from satellites at night when there's a low background, we can tell subtle thermal anomalies associated with where new hot gases are coming to the surface. We're also fortunate in that many of the volcanoes, particularly the picturesque ones in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest and in the Andes, have summit glaciers. When these gases are escaping to the surface, they'll form new cracks in summit glaciers that have opened. And typically when you see the cracks forming in the summit glacier, followed by emission of volcanic gases that we can measure either from helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft, or a whole new generation of multi-gas sensors, we can get a real-time change and a measurement of what the volcano is doing. So there are a number of precursors that typically happen at a volcano before it erupts, and fortunately we know where the volcanoes are.
I'm curious about the eruption process itself. Are there specific steps or stages associated with a volcanic eruption?
Sometimes you'll see a migration of the small magnitude earthquakes towards the surface, but you've got to have a dense seismic network to kind of see that happen before your eyes. But we've done it successfully, for instance, at Mount St. Helens. We've seen it at Mount Etna in Italy, and it really depends how much of a lead time you get, depends on how good your in-ground monitoring instruments are. But typically you'll see changes in gas emission, you'll see increases in seismicity, and it's also that if you've got digital broadband seismometers, very high sensitive seismometers as part of your network, there's also information carried in the frequency content of these small earthquakes that tells us magma is on the move.
Does a volcano have a set supply of magma, or is it constantly being refreshed and augmented?
It's probably more episodic than anything. So in looking at the past eruptive histories of volcanoes that we have worldwide, we definitely know it's not a constant supply of magma that's being supplied unless it's a hotspot volcano like Hawaii. Typically what we have is periods of augmented growth in that volcano's history where you might have several eruptions over a course of, say, a few 10,000s of years, and then it goes quiet for another 10,000 years, but then it gets reactivated. Some of our oldest volcanic centers are on the order of, 1 million years old. Others have only been active volcanic centers for a few 100,000 years.
If that's the case, then I know that magma is stored in huge chambers beneath the volcano itself. So what happens once all the magma is gone, the volcano is done erupting? What happens to the volcano then, and especially with these now empty chambers underneath?
Well, typically, when you have chambers that exceed, say 1,000 cubic kilometers, and these kind of classes of volcanoes have been referred to as supervolcanoes, where you're literally, within a matter of weeks to months, emptying a chamber that's 1,000 cubic kilometers. And what happens is the crust above this huge chamber system actually subsides. And so they're actually kind of sinister because when you're looking on the landscape for a volcano, there's none that are obvious. In fact, what you've formed is a caldera. And typically, for instance, the Yellowstone caldera in the Four Corners region of the U.S., it actually forms a caldera that rivals the state of Rhode Island in terms of area.
So in other words, if you have a caldera that is a humongous size, that means that there was a volcano there that once blasted an awful lot of magma.
Yes. And another good example is Long Valley caldera in California in the eastern portion of the Sierra Nevadas, just east of the Sierra Nevadas. Another example is what is now Crater Lake in Oregon. There you had eruption not too long ago, about 7,700 years ago, of 50 cubic kilometers of magma. Not a super eruption, but still a very large eruption, typically putting ash out to, 50 kilometers up into the stratosphere, and certainly would have had global climate impact because of the amount of sulfur dioxide gas that was put up into the stratosphere during that event.
There's an important question I need to ask you, and that is, what is the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI?
It's kind of a catch-all way to rank volcanoes and volcanic eruptions in terms of the impacts that they would have and also their relative size. But it's also a matter of what kind of fragments were produced during the eruption. In other words, what is the proportion of ash that it produced versus ballistic fragments that typically settle half a kilometer from the vent. And it's an overall measure of how big an eruption was and how intense it was. Kind of a dual classification, if you will.
And I understand it's 0 through 8?
0 through 8, so something like Krakatoa 1883 is a 6, Tambora, is a 6 or maybe a 7. Things like Yellowstone and Long Valley, when they erupted, were 8s. Wow. They're at the end of the scale.
And we've been hearing a lot about Kilauea, a volcano in Hawaii, has been in the news. What exactly has been going on there with this volcano?
Okay, so Kilauea has been an eruption, and Kilauea is the youngest volcano that comprises the Big Island of Hawaii. There are actually 5 different shield volcanoes that comprise the Big Island of Hawaii. Kilauea is the youngest, and it forms the southeastern portion of the island. It's been erupting since 1983 for over 35 years now. What's changed is the fact that we've had a change in the eruptive points from which Kilauea is erupting. Up until late April, Kilauea was erupting from its summit crater at Halemaumau, and it was also erupting from a smaller vent down the rift lower in elevation towards the northeast called Pu'o'o. And what's changed is we've had catastrophic draining of the lava lake at Pu'o'o, as well as drop in the lava lake at Halemaumau and Kilauea's summit, and movement of magma from those 2 vents downrift in the subsurface to where it's emerged and created new fissure vents down in the Leilani subdivision and the Lani Puna Garden District of the lower Puna zone. And we've got now as many as 22 fissures that have been active, many of them sourcing lava flows that have now reached the ocean. The other thing that we're seeing is Kilauea's summit has produced ash plumes that have ranged anywhere from 3,000 feet to as high as 30,000 feet on May 16th at 4:15 a.m. in the morning, Hawaii Standard Time. And that's caused us at the USGS Hawaii Volcano Observatory to put out a volcano observatory notice for radiation, because whenever you have a volcanic vent emitting ash up to 20 and 30,000 feet where commercial airlines fly, we have to get word out to the aviation sector, as well as the general populace and all the emergency responders and land managers in the vicinity.
Charlie, we're running out of time, but I did want to step into the issue about supervolcanoes. We've been hearing an awful lot about supervolcanoes in the media. I know several science-oriented channels of TV have run specials about supervolcanoes, and we mentioned earlier about Yellowstone. What separates a supervolcano from just a regular volcano?
The fact that they've, in a single eruption, erupted on the order of 1,000 cubic kilometers of material. It's literally the size of the eruption that has ensued from, an event that may have taken place over several weeks to a month.
So what's the biggest eruption so far?
Probably the one from Toba in Sumatra in Indonesia. That happened about 74,000 years ago, and it put out on the order of 3,000 cubic kilometers of material. As a matter of fact, there's a constriction in the human genome right around then where probably there were less, humans on the planet in the aftermath.
We were talking about Yellowstone being predicted to erupt. How likely is that to happen, and when is it expected to erupt?
Well, in other words, the chances of another supervolcano eruption from Yellowstone happening are probably about 1 in a few million, because its last one was 640,000 years ago. However, Yellowstone is still powered by the heat from magma, the residual magma that's still at depth, and we have active hydrothermal vents and geysers. What is more probable at Yellowstone is that we have actually steam-driven explosions, and they've occurred, as recently as the 1930s as well as the 1890s, where you can have around several of hydrothermal pools where you've got hot water coming to the surface. You can actually have an explosion that can throw out breadbox and refrigerator-sized fragments, a few hundred meters from the vent. And in a park, that has over 1 million visitors per year, that is a concern for us.
Dr. Charles Vandervelde, thank you so much for taking time and basically telling us just about everything we wanted to know about volcanoes.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And I'm afraid that's all the time we have on this Science Edition of Press Conference USA.